The time was the 1970s, a decade best forgotten in terms of fashion. Although I see some of the fashions of the 70s are actually coming back. There's full beards and also large eyeglasses. And these things are coming back. They come back. They cycle every 30 years or so. The place is 1524 Farrell Crescent, Delta, BC, which is the house my parents have owned since 1969. They've owned it from 1969 to today. In fact, they've had the same address and the same phone number since 1969. Farrell Crescent is in Beach Grove, which is the area you get to if you turn left into Tawasin. If you hit the ocean, you've gone too far. Back in the 1970s, Beach Grove was actually considered to be the low-rent district of Tawasin, which is hard to believe today, as Tawasin has gradually transformed itself over the last few decades into a mini West Van. You need to have well over $1 million to buy a house on Farrell Crescent today. But back then, Beach Grove was really middle class. Our family car was an orange VW Rabbit, a two-door for a family of 5. And it was a manual transmission. There was no radio. My dad would stick the keys in the little slot where the radio should have been. And it's a good thing we didn't have the big car seats that we have nowadays, because you couldn't fit 3 car seats across the back of the Volkswagen Rabbit. And it'd be difficult to get in there with the 2 doors. My parents' house was, and still is, a small bungalow. And I mean a real bungalow. There was no attic, and there's no basement. It's just 1 floor. It's been added on to a little bit, just one section. It used to be a carport. But you know, when I go back there, it still feels like home. It feels like home more than any other house I've ever been in. So what do I remember about Christmas? I remember my parents sleeping on the floor of our tiny living room in sleeping bags so that my grandparents, my mom's parents, could sleep in my parents' bed. So my parents were in the living room. I remember that Santa would put out presents for each of me and my brother and my sister on 3 chairs that were right next to the dining room table. And some presents would be wrapped, others not, and they were all laid out on the chairs. And there was also some presents under the tree, and they were from my grandparents and my uncle and a few others. And I remember the stockings for the 3 of us would also be on the chairs, with small toys and candy and a Japanese orange in the toe, which I think a lot of families do that. The stockings could not go on the mantle, as we didn't have one. There was a fireplace in the living room, but it was a 1960s style, which is basically a brick wall with a hole for the fire. I remember the Christmas tree was always a real tree. We had an old style incandescent Christmas lights on the Christmas tree. They got so hot, I really don't know how they didn't burn our house down, but somehow we survived. On the tree, we also had the old style glass ornaments they sort of have a dent in them with silver things inside, and they glow. It was really quite nice. And I'll get back to those in a second. Regarding tinsel, there was massive amounts of tinsel on the tree every year. So much that you couldn't even really see the tree. It was just a mound of silvery tinsel. Tinsel, do you remember tinsel?
Yeah.
Tinsel, it was like some sort of amazing space-age material. Light, virtually indestructible, and lasts forever. My dad would always put the tree outside after Christmas, waiting for the shredder truck that would come along the road, and it would shred the tree a week or 2 after Christmas. The tree always looked so sad sitting in the backyard, and we tried to take most of the tinsel off, and of course in those days there was no recycling or anything, so you know that's something that would be done differently these days. But the tinsel would blow all over the yard because we wouldn't get all of it off. And so we'd be finding tinsel year-round in the yard, in trees and hedges and all over. And of course, it's just there all the time, just as shiny as ever. I can report that tinsel lasts for at least 40 years. As my mom, just a couple weeks ago, gave me a box of old glass ornaments from the 1970s, and there was tinsel stuck to them. Still in perfect condition. I'm thinking about sending some of the tinsel to NASA to see if they can use it in the space program. Christmas dinner was at the dining table in our small house in Tsawwassen. It was very cozy. Occasionally we had a couple extra adults, so the kids would be off in the kitchen table so that we would have enough room. Dinner was very traditional. There was turkey, cranberry sauce out of a can in the shape of the can, and Brussels sprouts. Boiled. In the interest of time, I won't go into too much detail about my strong views on Brussels sprouts. Suffice it to say that to this day, boiled Brussels sprouts are the only food I will not eat until today. Because my table mate, Klaus Berger here, teased me like my brother does. And I said, I'll eat some. And he also said he would heckle if I didn't. So, to this day, my brother teases me about Brussels sprouts every time we have any dinner together. And he usually tries to force me to eat one and so on. I actually remember very little about the gifts that I received, lots of Lego and clothes, but I realize now that the gifts were not important, even though children tend to obsess over them, and I was no exception, of course. Looking back now on Christmas, I see that we took so much for granted. We didn't have a lot of money, but that wasn't important. The gifts are not important. The fact is that we lived in a lovely grove. Beach Grove really is a grove. And it is to this day. And it's 2 blocks from Boundary Bay, the beach. An absolutely lovely place to live and to grow up. It was peaceful, it was quiet, it was safe. And we were all together for Christmas, the family, and that's what really matters in retrospect. And of course, by third world standards, we were wealthy beyond measure. We had clean water, food, shelter. We lived in a country free of war and civil strife, which is more than many have in our world. At this point, I'm going to resist the temptation to launch into a protracted diatribe on how rampant commercialism has ruined Christmas. I simply don't have time for this. In fact, I'm probably over time already. However, I will encourage everyone to slow down on Christmas Day. Cherish the time with loved ones, as this in time is all that matters. Not the gifts, not the declarations, and not whether the side dish for the turkey was perfect or not. In time, none of these things will matter. It's the time with loved ones that counts. In short, we need to realize that much of what we stress about and obsess about at Christmas doesn't matter at all and will not be remembered. And with that, I'm going to stop talking. Because I'm already a couple minutes over. Merry Christmas to all of you, and Happy New Year.